last year, I have done quite a few tutorials on editing. We've talked about editing mobile, we've talked about editing on desktop, laptop, and I constantly get asked, how does this all fit together in my personal system? And this is what I want to share with you. This has been an ongoing project for about a year now. Last year, I did a video talking about how I was trying to get everything consolidated into one place, and the way that I used to work was crazy. I had everything fairly recently on a drive from the last year or two, but then everything else that was older was living on various drives around the studio or in the closet, and this wasn't cutting it. So I want to talk about how I piece everything together in this video. Maybe that'll give you some ideas of your own. And I do want to give a special thanks to Squarespace for sponsoring this video. From websites and online stores to marketing tools and analytics, Squarespace is the all-in-one platform for building beautiful websites and running your business. We'll talk about websites and sharing online in just a second, but let's get into the heart of the system here. So when I started putting this together, there were several concerns that I had, goals that I needed to achieve. And so one, everything needed to live in one place on one drive. Two, it needed to be backed up. Those are pretty basic preliminary prerequisites that anyone would want to have. In addition to that, I wanted a way to work mobile because I travel quite a bit and I edit on an iPad, I edit on a laptop sometimes, and I need images to be able to be accessed, input and output pretty much from anywhere. And so this is where I have arrived at the current system. So it all kind of evolves around this back here. I know that we're in a different configuration on the studio today. Normally I film from that end this way, but I wanted to show you some of this stuff. So this side of the studio is my Mac setup. This side is my Windows setup. I use both platforms because when I develop presets, I need to be able to test them in both environments. There's some things that I like to do on Windows, so I am able to bounce back and forth. But let's talk about where images are stored. When I'm here in the studio, this is the setup that I use the most. It's my iMac, and I've got a series of drives over here. And this drive in particular is my imaging drive. It's a RAID configuration drive, and only images live on this drive. The other drives have video files on them, and that's a different setup, and we're just talking about images in this video. But what's cool is this is backed up to Dropbox, and so there are various services you can use for backup. I like Dropbox because, for one, Dropbox syncs with various computers, and so I don't want all of these files to sync up and live on my Windows machine. I don't have enough storage over there. So you can actually select in Dropbox what you want to sync locally and what just lives in the cloud. So it's really cool because you have the benefit of a backup to the cloud, but then you have access to things. And so that's really important. Now, I'm using Lightroom, which is not my favorite editor by a long stretch. I prefer Capture One, but I do like it just as a digital asset management system. I think that the catalog, the way it works, the way I can, do smart folders to store files a lot of times because I have a YouTube channel and I need to be able to access all of the images I've ever taken with a specific lens. I can set up a smart folder to do that. That is super cool. The other thing that I love about Lightroom is that it has cloud access. And this is a really big deal for me because if I'm going to be editing on the road and if I'm going to be bringing images in on my iPad and working a little bit on the plane, I need to be able to sync those into the cloud, and any edits that I do, I can sync those as well. So I do some editing in Lightroom. It's not my favorite editor. Like I said, I actually prefer Capture One, but this is where everything lives, and with relative ease by sorting by date or by camera model or by lens, or even when I did film scans, I'm usually pretty good about my file naming conventions, so I can search and get to things in a matter of minutes. Another thing that's kind of essential for me that I don't think I've ever actually shared on any of my videos before, but I use these all the time. This is a Wacom tablet, and I have used these probably since the late 90s. This is an Intuos Pro, which is their latest, and I absolutely love these. It's an essential tool for me. When I got my first one, it was in the late 90s, and I used a mouse for everything back then, and I was starting to get carpal tunnel issues in my wrist, and it really hurt. And so I was talking to my sister one day, who's a designer, and she said, "Have you ever tried the Wacom tablets?" And I said, "Nope." And I went and bought one, and it changed my life. Not only did it deal with the hand problems, I don't even use a mouse anymore. I mean, there's a mouse on this computer. I don't even have one on the iMac, but I don't touch this. I use this for everything. I use it in the Finder and the OS. And for me, the ability to use either multi-touch, because you can set these up either way, or a pen, is much more creative than pointing and clicking with a mouse. Like, I want to be able to kind of pinch and zoom, and that's why the iPad was so attractive to me when that came out. This actually has a button on it. You have a bunch of function buttons over here that you can, one of them will will toggle on and off whether you want to use this as a pen or whether you want to use this as a trackpad, and it supports multi-touch. And these are, I mean, this is a huge life changer. This is the latest one. I've owned several of these over the years. Any of them will do. They all kind of do the same thing, but they're incredible. This one is Bluetooth, so it is wireless. There's no power. You have to recharge it once in a blue moon, but Bluetooth, blue moon. But anyway, it is wireless, and this will change your life. Another thing I love about this is pressure sensitive. So for instance, if you are drawing a mask in Photoshop or Lightroom or even Capture One, and you want a little more finite control than what you're going to get with a mouse, and you're trying to get into details, pressure sensitivity is pretty amazing, because the harder I press, the more flow I get from the brush, or that you can also increase the brush size. It starts acting like an actual pen if you're using pen and ink, and it's incredible. I mean, I don't think I could live without this. When I'm doing desktop work, I even travel with this. When I travel with a laptop, this is the most essential thing that I have ever owned in my life. And anyway, check them out. They're pretty awesome. Let's talk mobile for a second. So many of you know that I am a big fan of editing on an iPad, not just stills, but also video. And I think that this in many ways has really replaced laptops for me to a large degree. I still use laptops occasionally for various things, but I've moved to the iPad for about 90% of my workflow when I am mobile. And the other thing that's really cool is when you use Lightroom Mobile on iOS, or whether you're using it on Android, and I'll show you something in a second with that, everything will sync up with the cloud. And then I use Lightroom Classic for my management system. So that's synced to the cloud too. So what happens is, let's say I shoot some images on one of my Sony cameras and I bring all the raw files into here. Those will automatically upload to the cloud. When I get back to the studio, they've been downloaded into Lightroom Classic. They're already in my library, so I don't really have to do any moving of files at that point. They're all just synced through the cloud. This is a super handy way to work. And what's also cool is that when you use Lightroom or any of the Adobe products on a desktop or a laptop, you do have a limit to how many licenses you can have set up at one time, so it's a limit of 2 computers. What's cool is the mobile version of Lightroom does not have that limit. So I've done a lot of videos on smartphones this year, and I have Lightroom installed on every one of them. And again, images go up to the cloud, they come down here, they're all in one place, everything's synced. And what's cool is the images that live in the cloud I can get to from any device. So I might take images on my iPhone when I'm on a trip, because I'm going to use them for sample images in a video, let's say. I come back and I can even get to them on my iPad and edit them while I'm on the plane. Everything syncs up, your edits, everything, and all goes back over into the desktop setup. So that is like how I like to work mobile. I also have this iPad, which is the year before. This is a 2017. I actually prefer this a little more because it's a smaller size. This is a 11 inch, I believe. I can't remember. I don't have a ruler. But anyway, I think that any iPad Pro will probably work. And if you're not really working on video, I think a mini, even though the screen size is a little bit smaller, you have a lot of options. And I think that a lot of people, when they ask me that question, they're trying to figure out how to spend the least amount of money. And I don't think you have to worry about that too much. I think they're all powerful enough to do Lightroom work. One thing that is particularly nice about having all of your images in one place is that you can get to them. So if you are scheduling social media posts in advance and you need images for that, everything is all in one place. It's easy to find stuff. Or if you want to update your portfolio on your website, you do have a website, right? Oh, you probably need to visit our show sponsor today, who are the awesome folks over at squarespace.com. Squarespace is an all-in-one solution for building beautiful websites, portfolios, or even an online store. They have an awesome drag-and-drop interface. You can build websites without having to write a single line of code. Squarespace now also features calendar integration, so if you want to do scheduling with clients, let's say, this is now super easy and a major lifesaver. So head over to Squarespace, do the free trial, and see if Squarespace is right for you. If it is, I can save you an additional 10% off your order by using offer code AOP on checkout. That offer code, once again, is AOP, and I want to give a special thanks and shout out to the folks at Squarespace for sponsoring another episode of The Art of Photography. Let's talk about backup, because if you're working mobile, it's really important to have something to do backups onto. This is Gnarbucks 2.0. This is something that I've recently started using. I love it. It has replaced the LaCie DJI Copilot that I was using before. This is much faster. What's interesting is when I did a review on this a couple weeks ago, I had a lot of people in the comments that didn't get it, and they said, well, why would you spend so much money on a hard drive when you can just get something cheap, or an SD card or something? And well, this is not just a hard drive. This is like a little mini computer. And It'll do all kinds of crazy things. All you have to do while you're on the road is open the back, stick in your SD card. There's an adapter if you're using XQDs or anything like that. You put that in and the box will automatically back up the entire contents of the drive, and there's some options of how you want to sort that. If you want to just put it into folders by file type, or if you just want the card copied. It does an MD5 check on it to make sure all the files got copied, and so you close this up, power it down, you move on. What I do with this is I keep video files on here because video files are really large and they're kind of hard to back up to the cloud in any reasonable length of time if you're on slow Wi-Fi. And so what I do is I back video up to this, and then I bring this into the iPad, or video from this into the iPad, and that's how I do editing on an airplane. And then when I get back to the studio, I will plug this in and double check and make sure that I've got everything on the RAID drives and what I want, and then I will clear it off, and then I'm off to travel again with it. But this is something that just I couldn't live without. It does some really advanced stuff too, like it will actually transcode video footage for you. So if you shoot MP4 and let's say you want to edit in ProRes, you can just set this to transcode all the videos you want in a specific folder and stick it back in your backpack, and it's doing all the transcoding, which takes forever sometimes to do while you're out and about. So it really is a big time saver, and it's very efficient in the end. So loving the NAR box, and there are other options available. There's the LaCie box that I mentioned. WD makes one. I think they have a second one coming out this year, but I really recommend doing something like this if you're working mobile. It's just an excellent backup just in case something happens to files. So I'm using Lightroom for all of my cloud syncing with my catalog. It is not my favorite image editor. In fact, not by a long stretch. Capture One, however, is my favorite image editor, and I use both of them together, and I'll kind of talk through some of that. So I moved over to the other side of the office. This is my Windows setup, just to show you. I actually run Capture One both on Windows and on the Mac, and what I will do is I will take images that I want to make specific edits on. I will export them from Lightroom. I'll move them onto one of these computers, then I'll do editing this way. What I do is I set those up as a session, not a catalog. I would love to be using Lightroom for everything and just use the catalog, but at least at the time I'm filming this, they don't have the cloud sync capabilities, and that's the thing that I really needed, so that's why I still use Adobe for that. But what I'll do is I'll set up sessions for these, and then I will store the session folder back on my imaging drive. Now I realize there's a little bit of redundancy here and I'm duplicating files, but really I'm not editing mass images all the time in Capture One. Usually I'm performing all of my selects in Lightroom. It's just when I do want to do some serious color work, that's when I'll bring things into Capture One. So it works really well that way. And this is the Windows setup I actually use. This is actually a Dell laptop, and this was the eGPU setup that I showed you guys a few months ago. And so it's actually running an NVIDIA external graphics card, and it drives this monitor back here. And so it's a really powerful setup and one that I really like using. So Capture One is an essential part of my workflow. I also think that Luminar are doing some interesting things. I did a video on that a while back. And Luminar will run as a plugin for Lightroom and Photoshop. And Photoshop you can get to from Lightroom also. So if I want to use those tools, I typically do them direct from Lightroom. For Capture One, I like to set up sessions, and it just really works well for me. This has been a big work in progress for me over the last year. And obviously you don't have to do something this complicated. It just depends on what your needs are. But I do recommend that you find a system that does work for you. I think it's just really important to have everything in one place that's backed up that you can get to easily. And whether or not you're as reliant on mobile as I am may be a different story. But this is how I do it, and I want to share that with you guys today because I get a lot of questions on that when we do tutorials. So if you have any other questions, drop me a comment. I'll see you guys in the next video. Until then, later.